You are lying still. The world outside is doing whatever the world does at this hour, turning, breathing, moving through its ordinary darkness. But here, in this room, in this quiet, something else is possible, something that the busy parts of the day tend to crowd out, the chance to think about time. Not to manage it or measure it or mourn its passing, just to think about it, to sit with it, to notice what a strange thing it actually is when you stop taking it for granted and simply look at it directly. Time is the medium we live in. It is so fundamental to experience that we rarely notice it at all. The way a fish, if a fish could think, might rarely notice water. It is simply the condition in which everything else happens. The before and the after, the not yet and the already gone. The thin moving edge of now that we call the present, and that slides away from us before we can quite hold it. We have clocks everywhere. We have synchronized our lives to time with extraordinary precision. And yet, if you were asked right now to say what time actually is, not what it measures, not how it moves, but what it is in itself, the answer would be harder to find than you might expect. This is not a personal failing. It is one of the deepest open questions in physics and philosophy. The people who have thought about time most carefully, who have made it their life's work, tend to end up more uncertain about it than when they began. The philosopher who spends 30 years studying time ends up sitting with the question more honestly than the person who has never questioned it at all. There is something clarifying about that, something almost restful, because it means you do not need to solve time tonight. You only need to wonder about it. And wondering, unlike solving, is something you can do while lying still in the dark. And then there is the question of reality. Reality is what time happens in. Or perhaps time is what reality happens in. The relationship between them is one of the stranger puzzles at the heart of modern physics. A puzzle that, when you follow it far enough, starts to sound less like a scientific problem and more like something the ancient philosophers were already circling thousands of years ago with different language and different tools and the same fundamental bewilderment. Is the world out there what it appears to be? Is the chair, the wall, the floor beneath you, are those things as solid and definite as they feel? Physics says, in its careful way, probably not entirely. The table is mostly empty space. The particles that make it up do not have definite positions until something interacts with them. The chair beneath you is an event as much as a thing, a temporary arrangement of energy in a field that extends in all directions without a clear edge. None of this is meant to be unsettling. Actually, and this might sound strange, there is something about it that can be deeply, quietly comforting. The discovery that reality is stranger than it appears is also the discovery that the ordinary understanding we move through the world with is a kind of simplification, a useful map that covers a territory far more interesting than the map suggests. And maps, however useful, are never the territory itself. Tonight, we are going to walk the territory. We are going to move slowly through what physics and philosophy and the ancient traditions of human thought have found when they looked closely at time and reality, not to arrive at a definitive account, because no such account exists, but to get a sense of the shape of the mystery, to understand why the people who have looked most carefully have come away not with answers, but with a quality of wondering that is deeper and more interesting than any simple answer could be. We are going to let the question do what good questions do: open things up rather than close them down. Are real, and you, the particular, are real, and you, the particular consciousness that is reading or listening to these words, you are real too, in whatever sense anything is real, which is, it turns out, a more interesting sense than you might have assumed. Let your breathing slow down. Let the day's remaining urgency drift somewhere. It doesn't need your attention. And ask yourself, in the quiet, before we begin, what if time is not the container that experience moves through, but the experience itself? And what if reality is not the ground beneath your feet, but the light your mind makes as it moves through the dark? There is a moment that keeps slipping away from you. You know the one, the present moment, the now, the philosopher's razor's edge between what has been and what is coming. You are always, by definition, in it, and you can never quite catch it. By the time you think the thought this is now, the now you were thinking about is already a fraction of a second in the past, replaced by a new now that is already passing as you try to notice it. The present moment, looked at closely, seems to be always arriving and always departing and never quite here. This is not a poetic observation. It is, in a precise sense, a philosophical puzzle that has occupied serious thinkers since at least the ancient Greeks. The philosopher Heraclitus put a version of it this way: you cannot step into the same river twice, because by the second stepping, both the river and you have already changed. The river flows. The moment flows. Identity itself, looked at closely enough, flows. The philosopher Zeno proposed paradoxes, elegant, logical puzzles designed to show that motion, as we normally understand it, is incoherent. An arrow in flight, he argued, is at each instant of time in a definite position, stationary at that instant, as all things are stationary at their instant. If it is stationary at every instant, how does it move? We know the arrow moves. We know the river flows. The paradox does not prevent motion, but it points at something genuine, that the way we think about time and motion contains assumptions that do not survive careful examination. The physicist and philosopher Janan Ismail has written extensively about what she calls the flow of time, the feeling, universal among conscious beings, that time has a direction, that it passes, that we are moving through it from one end to another. She notes something important. Nothing in the laws of physics, as currently understood, requires this. The fundamental equations of physics are, for the most part, time-symmetric. They work the same whether time runs forward or backward. There is nothing in the equations that insists on a direction of travel. And yet, we experience time as having a direction, as moving incontrovertibly from past to future in a way that seems as real as anything we know. Where does the arrow of time come from if physics doesn't provide it? This is not a question with a settled answer. One proposal involves entropy, the tendency of closed systems to move from more ordered to less ordered states, from low entropy to high entropy. A broken egg does not reassemble itself. A puff of smoke does not contract back into a cigarette. These processes have a direction, and that direction is what we experience as the forward movement of time. But the entropy explanation, while illuminating, is not complete. It explains why certain processes are irreversible. It does not fully explain why we experience the present as present, why we feel ourselves to be at a particular point in time, moving through it, rather than simply extended across the whole of time, the way we are extended across space. You do not feel yourself to be in all places simultaneously. You are here, in this room, but you also do not feel yourself to be at all moments simultaneously. You are now, in this moment. That sense of location in time, that particular feeling of nowness, has no established physical explanation. It is one of the strangest features of consciousness, and one of the least examined. The philosopher and cognitive scientist Daniel Dennett has argued that the experience of time as flowing is itself a kind of construction, that the brain stitches together its inputs into a narrative that feels sequential, that feels like it has a before and an after, but that this stitching is a process that takes time, involves memory, and can be disrupted in ways that reveal its constructed nature. There are neurological conditions in which the experience of time falls apart. Patients describe feeling that events are simultaneous that were clearly sequential. They describe the past arriving after the present. They describe time as moving backward or as having stopped. Their brains have lost the ability to perform the stitching that the rest of us do automatically. And what they experience in its absence is, by their accounts, profoundly disorienting. This suggests that what we experience as the flow of time is not a simple readout of physical reality. It is an interpretation, a construction, a story the brain tells itself about the sequence of events it is receiving. A story that is very, very convincing, and that may not be the whole truth. There is a famous thought experiment in the philosophy of time, proposed by the philosopher J.M.E. McTaggart in 1908. McTaggart argued that we can describe time in two ways. We can describe it as the A series, past, present, future, the series that flows and has a direction and changes, in which events move from future to present to past, and in which the now is constantly shifting. Or we can describe it as the B series, earlier than, later than, simultaneous with, a fixed relational ordering of events that does not flow, does not change, in which events simply are at their positions, and no position is specially privileged as now. He then argued, with considerable logical care, that neither description is coherent on its own, and that therefore time itself may not be real in the way we ordinarily assume, forces us to ask. When we say time flows, forces us to ask. When we say time flows, what exactly are we saying? And when we say the present is now, what work is that now actually doing? If the present moment cannot be located by physics, and if the flow of time is a construction of the mind, what is the ground beneath the experience? And is there a ground at all? There is a Sanskrit word, Maya, that is older than most of the written languages we think of as ancient. In the philosophical traditions of India, in the Upanishads, in the Advaita Vedanta school, in the great commentaries that accumulated around these texts over millennia, Maya is often translated as illusion. But that translation loses something important. Maya does not mean that the world is a simple hallucination, that nothing exists, that you are dreaming in a trivial sense. It means something more precise and more interesting. It means that the world, as it appears to the ordinary, unexamined mind, is not the world as it is. That the shapes we cut the world into, this separate thing, that separate thing, this moment distinct from that moment, the self distinct from the world it inhabits, are cuttings that the mind makes, not divisions that the world comes with. The world, underneath the cuttings, may be something else altogether. Concluded, in broad terms, was that time, as we ordinarily experience it, as sequence and duration and the movement from past to future, is itself one of the cuttings, one of the shapes the mind imposes on an underlying reality that does not itself have those shapes. Underlying the appearance of time, this tradition proposed, is something they called Brahman, an undivided, unchanging, eternal ground of being in which nothing actually moves and nothing is actually separate, and the whole apparatus of before and after is a feature of the observing mind rather than the observed world. This is a difficult idea. It becomes less difficult, in a strange way, when you notice that it is not entirely unlike what certain branches of modern physics are beginning to suggest. Move westward into the Mediterranean world of ancient Greece. Parmenides of Elea, writing in the 5th century BCE, argued that change is an illusion. What exists, he said, exists. It cannot not exist, because non-existence is impossible. You cannot have something come from nothing, and nothing cannot exist. Therefore, being is eternal, unchanging, undivided. The motion and change and diversity we observe with our senses are appearances, not realities. Beneath the appearances is a single, static, eternal whole. His student Zeno produced the paradoxes we mentioned earlier, those elegant logical traps designed to show that motion, taken seriously, generates contradictions. Not because motion doesn't happen, but because our ordinary way of thinking about time and space cannot account for it without running into trouble. For a long time, these were dismissed as clever puzzles with obvious solutions. Then, quantum mechanics arrived, and the solutions turned out to be less obvious than they appeared. In China, around the same period, the Taoist tradition was developing its own version of a related insight. The Tao Te Ching, attributed to Laozi, and dated to approximately the 6th century BCE, begins with a sentence that translates roughly as, "The Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao. The reality that language can capture is not ultimate reality. The thing that words can pin down is not the thing itself." This is not mystical evasion. It is a precise philosophical claim that the concepts we use to divide up experience, including the concepts of before, after, now, then, this moment, that moment, are tools of the mind, not features of the world. The world, prior to the naming, is something the naming cannot reach. The Taoist philosophical project was partly about learning to be in relationship with that prior something, to act from it, rather than from the overlay of conceptual divisions that ordinarily mediates experience. In the Western philosophical tradition, St. Augustine of Hippo, writing in the 4th century CE, in the period just after the Roman world was beginning its slow unraveling, turned his extraordinary mind to the question of time and produced an analysis that is still discussed in philosophy seminars today. Augustine asked, "What is time?" He answered, "When no one asks me, I know. When someone asks me, I do not know." He was being precise, not evasive. He meant that time is so fundamental to experience that it resists the kind of articulation that experience normally allows. We are inside it in a way that prevents us from getting outside it to look at it clearly. He then developed an analysis in which past, present, and future are not three different things, but three modes of a single present: the present of past things, which we call memory; the present of present things, which we call direct experience; and the present of future things, which we call anticipation. All three, he argued, are present now, existing as modes of the mind's engagement with its contents, rather than as external features of the world. What Augustine was describing, without the language of neuroscience, 14 centuries before the relevant experiments were conducted, is remarkably close to what cognitive science now understands about the brain's construction of temporal experience. We do not perceive time directly. We construct it from memory and prediction and present sensation woven together into a narrative that feels like a direct readout of reality. The past that feels so solid and gone is, in the mind's experience of it, present, accessible right now as memory, influencing the present moment from within rather than from behind. The future that feels so definitively not yet is, in the mind's experience of it, also present, anticipated, prepared for, influencing decisions and perceptions and feelings from a position that hasn't arrived yet. The present moment, the thin edge of now, contains, somehow, all of it. These traditions, Indian, Greek, Chinese, early Christian, arrived at their insights by different routes, using different methods, embedded in different cosmological frameworks, and yet they converged on something strikingly similar: that time, as it appears to the ordinary mind, is not the final word. that underneath or within or beyond the apparent movement from past to future, there is something else, something that the movement is happening in, or emerging from, or being produced by. What that something else is, none of them could quite say. None of us can quite say it yet. If philosophers and sages across a dozen independent traditions arrived, without contact with each other, at the same uncertainty about time, what might that convergence tell us about time, or about the kind of mind that keeps running into this particular wall? Albert Einstein did not set out to dissolve the present moment. He set out to resolve a conflict between two theories, Newtonian mechanics and Maxwell's electromagnetism, that seemed to make incompatible predictions about how light behaved when observed from different moving frames. The resolution he found in 1905 was elegant and quiet, and, in its implications, world-altering in a way that is still not fully absorbed. He called it special relativity. And one of the things it said, one of the things that fell out of the mathematics with a kind of inevitability, once you accepted the basic premises, was that time is not universal. That two observers moving relative to each other will disagree about when events happened. That the sequence of events, this before that, can depend on the observer's state of motion. That there is no cosmic now that applies to everything simultaneously. That simultaneity is relative. This is not a philosophical speculation. It is a measured, confirmed physical fact. The GPS satellites orbiting the Earth must account for relativistic time dilation, the fact that time passes more slowly in a stronger gravitational field, and more quickly when moving faster, in order to give accurate positions. If the satellites ignored relativity, GPS would accumulate errors of several kilometers per day. The phones in your pocket work because Einstein was right about time. And Einstein was right that time is not what Newton thought it was, not the absolute, universal, cosmic clock ticking the same for everyone, everywhere, but something more local, more relational, more dependent on the observer's position and motion than any of us experience in ordinary life. 10 years after special relativity, Einstein completed general relativity, the theory that extends these ideas to include gravity and acceleration. And general relativity says something even stranger. It says that space-time, the four-dimensional fabric in which events are located, is not a passive container in which things happen. It is a dynamic entity that curves in the presence of mass and energy, and that its curvature is what we experience as gravity. The Earth does not pull the moon toward it through empty space. The Earth curves space-time, and the moon follows the curvature. And in this curved space-time, time is not separate from space. They are aspects of a single thing. You cannot change your position in space without also changing your position in time. Motion through space is always also motion through time. Sitting still, as you are now, you are still moving through time at the maximum rate available to you because you are expending no motion on space. The trade-off is built in. When physicists attempt to combine general relativity with quantum mechanics, the two great theories of the 20th century, each extraordinarily successful in its own domain, something strange happens to time. In quantum mechanics, the Schrödinger equation, the equation that describes how quantum systems evolve, is time symmetric. It works equally well in either direction. There is no preferred arrow. And in certain approaches to quantum gravity, attempts to write a theory of gravity that behaves quantum mechanically, time drops out of the equations altogether. The Wheeler-DeWitt equation, which is one prominent attempt at a quantum theory of gravity, contains no time variable. None. Time does not appear. This is called the problem of time, and it is one of the deepest unresolved problems in theoretical physics. What does it mean that the most fundamental equations we can write, equations describing the universe at its deepest level, do not contain time? Several interpretations have been proposed. Perhaps time is emergent, a macroscopic feature that arises from the statistical behavior of many quantum systems, the way temperature arises from the collective motion of many molecules without being a property of any individual molecule. Perhaps time is relational, not a background in which things happen, but a description of how things change relative to each other, such that in the absence of change, there is no time, and what we call the flow of time is simply the record of those changes. Perhaps time is not fundamental at all, and what we experience as the steady forward movement of moments is a large-scale approximation of something that, at the deepest level, does not resemble time as we know it in the slightest. The physicist Carlo Rovelli, who has written about these ideas with unusual clarity and warmth, suggests that the block universe picture, in which past, present, and future all exist simultaneously, spread out in the four dimensions of space-time, with no one moment specially privileged as the present, may be closer to physical reality than the flowing river of time we experience. In the block universe, you exist at every moment of your life simultaneously. The child you were and the elder you will become are both there at their respective coordinates in space-time, equally real, equally present in the timeless structure of the block. The feeling that you are moving through time, that the past is gone and the future is not yet, is a feature of your particular position in the block, of the way memory and anticipation are organized in a conscious being located at a specific space-time coordinate. The river does not flow. You are the river. You are the whole river, spread out. And the feeling of flowing is the feeling of being at one particular place in yourself. Rovelli is careful to note that this picture is not the final word. The block universe raises its own deep questions. If the future already exists in the block, in what sense are our choices real? If the past is equally real to the present, in what sense is it gone? If now has no special status in the physics, why does it feel so absolutely, unshakably special? In experience, these questions have answers. Various, contested, none fully satisfying. The block universe picture is not a solution to the mystery of time. It is a restatement of it in more precise terms. a better map of the territory, which reveals how strange the territory actually is. And then there is the measurement problem of quantum mechanics. The question of what happens when a quantum system, which exists in a superposition of possible states, is observed and collapses into a single, definite state. The role of observation in determining physical reality is one of the most hotly debated questions in the foundations of physics. Some interpretations place consciousness at the center of the collapse. Others distribute the collapse across many worlds. Others deny that collapse happens at all. What none of them can quite explain is why the world looks so definite from inside, when the equations say it is indefinite at bottom. If the most sophisticated physical theory we have drops time out of its fundamental equations, what does that suggest about the nature of the experience we are all having right now of time passing? There is a question that follows naturally from everything we have been exploring. If time is not what it appears, if the flowing present moment is a construction, if the block universe picture is closer to physical reality, if the fundamental equations contain no time, then who is the one experiencing time? Who is moving through the illusion? If it is an illusion, what is the self that finds itself located at a particular now, looking backward at a past and forward at a future, feeling the unmistakable sensation of duration and change? The neuroscientist Anil Seth has developed a framework he calls controlled hallucination. He argues that perception, all perception, not just unusual perception, is not a passive recording of what is out there, but an active construction. The brain, he says, is a prediction machine. It is constantly generating a model of the world and updating that model with incoming sensory data. What we experience as seeing the world is not the world directly. It is the brain's best current guess about the world, informed by the senses, but not simply identical to what the senses report. Consciousness, on this view, is a kind of dream that the brain has while awake. A rich, detailed, convincing inner movie that corresponds closely enough to external reality to be useful for survival. But that is not the same as external reality. This includes the experience of time. The sense you have of the present moment, its particular quality of nowness, its feeling of being exactly here and exactly now, is, on Seth's account, a feature of the brain's model of its own situation in time, not a direct readout of physical time itself. The brain generates a sense of where it is in the stream of events based on memory and anticipation and present sensation, and presents that sense to consciousness as the feeling of now. It is extraordinarily convincing. It is supposed to be. An organism that did not have a compelling sense of its current temporal location would have serious difficulties navigating a world in which timing matters. But the fact that the experience is functional does not mean it is simple or transparent, or an unmediated access to what time physically is. The philosopher Thomas Metzinger takes this further. He argues that the self, the persistent sense you have of being a subject, of there being someone inside looking out, of your experience belonging to a particular person, continues through time, is itself a model, a construct, the brain's representation of itself as an agent situated in the world. This is not the claim that you do not exist. You do, in some important sense. But the particular shape the self takes, the feeling of being a bounded, continuous, unified self with a past and a future, is something the brain produces, not something it simply reads off from reality. And like all constructs, it can be disrupted. In certain meditative states that have been described by practitioners across cultures for thousands of years, and that are now increasingly studied with neurological tools, the sense of self undergoes a change that meditators consistently describe as revelatory. The boundary between self and world softens. The sense of being a fixed point at a particular location in time becomes less solid. What remains, what meditators describe as remaining, is not nothing. It is something they find it very difficult to describe in the language built around the ordinary sense of self. They use words like openness, awareness, presence, clarity. Words that point at something that is not well captured by subject-object language, because the ordinary distinction between the subject who knows and the object that is known has become blurred in the experience itself. What is interesting for our purposes tonight is what they report about time. Meditators who have cultivated very deep states of stillness often describe a change in the experience of time, not the disappearance of time. They are still breathing, still in bodies that age, still in a world that changes, but a change in the relationship to time. The ordinary sense of being carried forward, of being driven by past and pulled by future, softens into something more like simple presence, a kind of perpetual now that is not the thin sliver of the philosophical present moment, but something more like a spaciousness in which past and future are present as traces and anticipations without the urgency they normally carry. The physicist and Buddhist practitioner B. Alan Wallace has suggested that this state, which he calls Rigpa in the Tibetan tradition, may correspond to something like direct awareness of the nature of mind prior to its construction of the ordinary experience of time and self. This is a hypothesis, not an established fact. The neurological correlates of deep meditative states are being studied, but what they ultimately correspond to in terms of physical reality remains open. What is not open is the reports themselves. The consistency of the description across traditions and centuries. The sense that something is being accessed that is not normally accessible. Something quieter and larger than the ordinary traffic of the mind. The philosopher William James, writing at the turn of the 20th century, described what he called the stream of consciousness, the continuous, flowing quality of mental life, the way thoughts and sensations and memories blend into each other without hard edges, the way the self seems to move through time like a river through a landscape. He was right that consciousness has this quality. He was also fascinated by the exceptions, the moments reported by mystics and in extraordinary states when the stream seems to stop or to reveal itself as something other than a stream, when what seems like movement turns out to be something more like depth. He never resolved the question of what those moments revealed. He thought they deserved serious attention. If the self is a model and time is a construction, and the present moment is something the brain produces rather than simply inhabits, what is the thing that is doing the modeling? And is it itself inside time at all? There is a past that no longer exists. Not in the ordinary sense. We know the past doesn't exist in the way the present does. What I mean is something more particular. There is a past that was directly experienced by people who are gone, that left no record, that produced no artifact, that cannot be inferred from any evidence that remains. The texture of those days, the quality of those moments, the precise sensation of a particular afternoon in a city that no longer stands, felt by a person who left no diary and no descendants. That past is gone. Not in the sense that physics would approve. In the block universe, that moment still exists at its space-time coordinates, as real as this one. But in any practical sense, in any sense that the living can access, it is gone. The experience is gone. The felt quality of those moments has passed through the event horizon of the present, and nothing on this side of the horizon can recover it. This is one of the stranger implications of taking time seriously. We tend to think of the past as fixed, solid, more reliable than the future, which is uncertain and open. The past at least happened, we say. It is settled. But the past is accessible to us only through evidence and memory, and both of those are imperfect, selective, and subject to revision. The historical record is fragmentary. Memory is reconstructive rather than reproductive. Every time you remember something, you are rebuilding it from traces, not playing back a recording. The past that seems so solid is, in terms of what is actually available to us, a partially dissolved construction built from an incomplete archive. The philosopher of history, R.G. Collingwood, argued that history, the discipline, is not the recovery of the past, but the reenactment of past thought in present minds. The historian reads the document, imagines the mind that produced it, and reconstructs something that is a genuine understanding of the past, but that exists entirely in the present. There is no time travel. There is only the present mind reaching toward what it can of the minds that preceded it. This means that everything we know about the past, about ancient civilizations, about historical events, about the lives of people we will never meet, is a present construction, built from evidence that exists now, in minds that exist now, subject to all the limitations and distortions that present minds are subject to. We do not know the past. We know our current best approximation of the past. These are not the same thing. And the future is the domain of possibility, of what has not yet been determined, of the open space into which choices and events will eventually collapse into particulars. The future, in a sense, does not exist, or exists only as a probability distribution, a spread of possibilities that will narrow as the present moves through it. But here, the block universe picture creates a peculiar vertigo. If the future already exists in the block, if what we will think and do and become is already there at its space-time coordinates, as real as what we are doing now, then the open space of possibility that we seem to navigate is itself an appearance. The uncertainty, the freedom, the sense that we could go either way, that too is a feature of our position in the block, of being located at a particular moment, looking forward at a structure we cannot see. Are we free? Or are we walking a path that is already laid? This question, determinism and free will, has occupied philosophers for centuries without resolution. The determinist says, the laws of physics determine what will happen, and given the current state of the universe and those laws, the future is fixed. The libertarian says, quantum mechanics introduces genuine indeterminacy, genuine randomness, and therefore the future is genuinely open. The compatibilist says, both can be true simultaneously, because freedom and determination are not in conflict if you understand them correctly. Each of these positions has serious philosophical defenders. None has been definitively established. And so we are left, as we often are when we follow these questions far enough, with a landscape of genuine uncertainty, not the comfortable uncertainty of problems we are working on, but the structural uncertainty of problems that may not be solvable with the tools we have. There are things about time that humanity may never know. We may never know what time is in itself, not how it behaves, which physics describes with great precision, but what it is, what its underlying nature is, why there is time at all rather than a timeless mathematical structure inhabited by nothing. We may never know whether the flow of time is real or apparent, whether the block universe is the truth, or whether something genuinely moves, genuinely passes, in a way that the timeless equations are failing to capture. We may never know whether consciousness is inside time or produces it, whether the experience of the present moment is a view from within a physical process, or something more fundamental that the physical process is somehow embedded in. These are not ignorances waiting for more data. They are structural mysteries, places where the inquiry keeps running into the limits of what inquiry, as we know it, can reach. And there is something else that may be permanently out of reach. The first moment of time. If the universe had a beginning, and the evidence suggests it did, in the event we call the Big Bang, then there was a first moment. Or perhaps more accurately, there was a boundary before which the concept of before does not apply, because time itself was not yet. What was it like? What was there? What is the word, even, for the condition prior to time? Before is a temporal concept. It doesn't apply to the condition prior to time. We have equations that approach the Big Bang, that trace the universe back to its earliest moments. But at the Planck time, the smallest interval that current physics can meaningfully describe, the equations break down. What lies beyond that boundary is currently mathematically inaccessible, perhaps permanently. What would it mean to reach the edge of what understanding can reach? Not because we haven't tried hard enough, but because the thing being understood is the very medium in which understanding occurs. What remains when the clock stops? The clock on the wall measures something. Whatever that something is, and we have spent this whole night establishing that it is stranger and more uncertain than it appears. The clock measures it, reliably, with precision. The second hand moves. The numbers change. The intervals between events are counted and stored and compared. And you, lying here in the dark, feel the time passing, feel the night moving, feel yourself, whatever that means, located at a particular point in the flow. The clock and the feeling agree, more or less. They agree enough that life is possible, that you can make appointments and remember the past and anticipate the future, and navigate a world that is organized around shared temporal coordinates. But behind the agreement, the questions remain. We have moved tonight through a great deal of territory. The philosophy of the present moment, the ancient traditions that found in time something more provisional and more constructed than ordinary experience suggests, the physics that removed time from its fundamental equations and then struggled to put something else in its place, the neuroscience that revealed the experience of time as a construction of the brain's predictive machinery, the deep uncertainties about the past, the future, the self that moves through them. None of it resolved, all of it illuminated in the way that careful attention illuminates things, not by making them simpler, but by making the complexity visible. There is a quality of attention that these questions seem to cultivate when you sit with them long enough, a kind of loosening of the grip that ordinary time has on the mind, a slight relaxation of the urgency that comes from living inside a clock, not indifference, not the detachment that comes from caring about nothing, something more like perspective, the sense that the present moment, however thin it appears when examined philosophically, is also somehow large enough to contain everything that matters. The past is here as memory. The future is here as possibility. The self is here, assembled from all of it, uncertain of its own nature, alive to the question. The physicist Richard Feynman once said that if you think you understand quantum mechanics, you don't understand quantum mechanics. He meant it as a caution against false certainty in a domain where certainty is genuinely unavailable. But there is something almost reassuring about his caution, if you hear it right. It means the confusion you feel when you try to think clearly about time and reality is not evidence of a personal failing. It is evidence that you are in contact with something genuinely difficult, that the discomfort of not knowing is appropriate, because what you don't know is actually unclear, not just to you, but to the people who have devoted their lives to understanding it. The mystery is real. Your confusion is the correct response to a real mystery. The night is moving past, as nights do. Somewhere, the clock is ticking, measuring whatever it measures in its reliable and faithful way. Somewhere, the block universe, if that is what there is, contains all the moments of your life simultaneously in a structure that sees no now and knows no flow. And here, at this particular coordinate, whatever it is, in this room, in this night, in this experience that insists on its own reality, even when the physics suggests it is more complicated than it feels, you are here. This is the only place you will ever be. And this moment, however thin the philosophers say it is the only one you will ever have. What you do with that, what any of us does with that, is the question that time has always been asking. Let the night continue. Let the questions settle. You do not need to answer them. You only need to let them be as large as they are. What if time is not the distance between where you are and where you are going, but simply the name we give to the experience of being alive? And what if, underneath that experience, something is waiting that has never moved at all?